The dust is finally settling over the Bay of Tunis, hanging suspended in the amber light of a late Mediterranean afternoon, and the air tastes not of salt, but of old stone pulverized into powder. It is the year 146 BC, and the world has just stopped holding its breath. For over a century, the heartbeat of the Mediterranean was defined by a twin rhythm: Rome and Carthage, two giants wrestling in the dark. But now, one heart has stopped, and the silence that rushes in to fill the void is deafening. The great noise of the siege engines has ceased, the shouting has faded into the wind, and what remains is a stillness that feels heavy, like a wet wool cloak draped over the soul. Close your eyes and stand there on the hillside overlooking the harbor. Feel the heat radiating off the cooling earth beneath your sandals. Smell the sharp, metallic scent of victory that somehow smells indistinguishable from loss. And listen to the way the seagulls are already reclaiming the sky, indifferent to the empire that has just evaporated beneath their wings. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, let the noise of your own day drift away like that smoke over the water, and focus on a single figure standing apart from the celebration. He is a Roman general, Scipio Aemilianus, the man who has just achieved what his grandfather's generation could only dream of. Yet his shoulders are not squared in triumph, but slumped in a profound, unreadable exhaustion. He is watching the city of Carthage burn, the flames turning the twilight into a bruising purple and orange. But he is not smiling. This is the moment history pivot, not with a cheer, but with a sob. It is a strange thing to witness a conqueror weeping. We expect the sword raised high, the laurel wreath adjusted, the speeches of glory that will be carved into marble back in the forum. But Scipio is trembling. He grasps the hand of his mentor and friend, the Greek historian Polybius, who stands silently beside him, witnessing this rare crack in the Roman armor. Polybius later wrote about this moment with a kind of hushed reverence, noting that Scipio did not look like a man who had just won the greatest war of his age. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. And indeed, he had. In the curling smoke of Carthage, Scipio did not see the defeat of an enemy. He saw the future of Rome. He saw the inevitable turning of the great wheel of time that crushes all things eventually. It is a historical truth that in this moment of absolute victory, Scipio turned to Polybius and recited lines from Homer's Iliad, speaking the prophecy of the fall of Troy. A day will come when sacred Troy shall perish, and Priam and his people shall be slain. When Polybius asked him what he meant by those dark words, Scipio didn't hide his fear. He admitted that he was afraid for his own country, for he realized that the fate of Carthage, once mighty, once proud, once the master of the seas, was the fate of all empires. Assyria had fallen, Persia had fallen, Macedon had fallen, and now Carthage. He knew, with the terrible clarity of a man standing at the end of the world, that Rome's turn would come. This tears the veil of simple history and reveals the deep human anxiety beneath the toga. Rome was not a monolith of confidence. It was a society driven by a deep-seated fear of extinction, a fear that had fueled its discipline and its unity for centuries. The existence of Carthage had been the whetstone against which the Roman character was sharpened. Carthage was the boogeyman in the night, the reason you woke up early, the reason you obeyed the laws, the reason you sacrificed for the common good. Because if you didn't, Hannibal might come back. But now, look at the smoke drifting over the water. The boogeyman is dead. The external pressure that held the complex arch of Roman society together has been removed, and Scipio, in his wisdom, senses the structural weakness that will follow. He weeps because he knows that without an enemy to fight, Rome will eventually turn its sword upon itself. The discipline born of necessity will dissolve into the indulgence born of security. The camaraderie of the shield wall will fracture into the rivalry of the political club. It is a profound psychological pivot point. Imagine the sun dipping lower now, casting long, stretching shadows across the ruins, shadows that seem to reach out toward Italy across the sea. The soldiers down in the camps are likely opening wine, celebrating the loot they will carry home, dreaming of land grants and glory. They see the end of a hard job. They see peace. But Scipio sees the beginning of a different kind of war, a silent war of the soul. He understands that the worst thing that can happen to a warrior culture is to run out of worthy opponents. When the danger is outside the walls, the people inside are brothers. When the danger is gone, the differences between them, rich and poor, patrician and plebeian, suddenly become sharp and intolerable. The destruction is thorough, yes, but it is the silence that is most haunting. It is the silence of a rivalry that defined the Mediterranean for 3 generations, suddenly going mute. There is no one left to say no to Rome. And for a republic built on the concept of checks and balances, on the idea that power must always be opposed and limited, this absolute dominance is a poison pill coated in honey. Scipio wipes his face, perhaps embarrassed by his display of emotion, or perhaps indifferent to it. For what does the judgment of men matter when you are contemplating the judgment of time? The wind shifts, blowing the acrid smoke away from them, out towards the open sea, revealing the first stars pricking the darkening sky. These are the same stars that look down on the founding of Carthage, and the same stars that will look down on the fall of Rome centuries later. The continuity of nature contrasts sharply with the fragility of human achievement. It creates a mood of gentle melancholy, a lullaby for the vanished city, and a preemptive dirge for the victor. We can imagine the sounds of the camp below becoming rhythmic, the clatter of armor, the murmur of voices, eventually settling into the quiet hum of the night watch. Scipio turns away from the railing, his silhouette stark against the fading fires. He has done his duty. He has obeyed the Senate. He has destroyed the rival. But as he walks back toward his tent, stepping over the debris of history, he carries a heavy burden, the knowledge that the true test of Rome has just begun. The external war is over, but the internal struggle, the battle for Rome's soul in the absence of fear, is starting tonight, right here in the ashes. The tragedy of 146 BC is not just that a city died, but that a certain version of Rome died with it, leaving behind something more powerful, more wealthy, and infinitely more dangerous to itself. The night air cools, settling over the Mediterranean like a soft blanket, hiding the scars of the day. But the memory of those tears remains, a testament to the fact that even in the height of glory, the wise can see the twilight coming. The message that Carthage has fallen travels across the Tyrrhenian Sea, not like a thunderclap, but like a slow, warming breeze that pushes the storm clouds finally and forever over the horizon. It moves from ship to ship, from harbor to harbor, until it reaches the stone wharves of Ostia and drifts up the Tiber River to Rome itself. Imagine the city in this specific moment of realization. There is no internet, no breaking news ticker, only the gradual dawning awareness that the great shadow in the south has evaporated. For the first time in over 100 years, a Roman can look at the sea without scanning for the silhouette of a Punic warship. The tension that had tightened the muscles of the Republic for generations, the collective holding of breath that defined the lives of grandfathers, fathers, and sons, is suddenly released. It is a moment of profound, intoxicating relief, the kind that makes your limbs feel heavy and your eyelids droop, just as you feel now, sinking deeper into the comfort of your own bed. But as the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, this relief begins to curdle into something unfamiliar and unsettling. Rome discovers that peace is not merely the absence of war. It is a landscape all its own, one that the Republic has no map for. For centuries, Rome was a creature of reaction. It was built to survive. Its laws, its prayers, its very social hierarchy were designed to withstand pressure. The patrician needed the plebeian to hold the shield. The plebeian needed the patrician to command the legion. They were bound together by the iron bands of necessity. Now those bands have snapped. The silence that settles over the forum is not the peaceful silence of a library, but the eerie silence of a gladiatorial arena after the gates have been locked and the crowds have gone home. It is a vacuum, and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. Into this empty space creeps a subtle lethargy, a drifting sense of purposelessness that is far more dangerous than any Carthaginian elephant. The ancient historians, writing with the benefit of hindsight, were obsessed with this specific moment. They spoke of metus hostilis, the fear of the enemy. It sounds like a curse. But the Romans realized too late that it was actually a blessing. It was the gravity that kept their moral universe in orbit. Without the gravitational pull of a rival, the stars of Roman virtue began to drift off course. Historians still argue whether the loss of this sphere was the sole catalyst for the Republic's decline, or simply the moment that revealed rot that was already there. But the psychological impact is undeniable. Think of it like a great archway of stone. The stones stay up because they lean against each other, pressing inward under the weight. Remove the weight, remove the pressure, and the stones have no reason to hold together. They begin to slip. You can see this slipping in the small details of daily life in 146 BC. The sentries at the city gates lean a little more casually on their spears. The debates in the Senate, once focused on existential strategy and survival, begin to splinter into petty quarrels over protocol and prestige. There is a sense of "now what?" that hangs over the 7 hills. The adrenaline is gone. The nervous energy that fueled the conquest of the Mediterranean has nowhere to go. So it begins to turn inward, simmering like heat trapped in a closed room. It is a quiet tragedy, invisible to the eye, but felt in the bones of the city. The Roman state was a machine built for war, fueled by anxiety. When you take away the anxiety, the machine doesn't just stop, it malfunctions. It begins to eat itself. The old men in the Senate, who remembered the terrifying days of Hannibal crossing the Alps, likely felt a phantom pain, a missing limb. They remembered the terror that made them strong. They remembered how the threat of annihilation had made every Roman a brother to his neighbor. Now, looking at the peaceful, sun-drenched streets, they perhaps sensed that the safety they had fought for was a disguised trap. security allows for selfishness. When you are no longer worried about your house burning down tomorrow, you start worrying about whether your neighbor's house is bigger than yours. This is the dangerous silence of peace. It is the sound of ambition waking up from its nap, stretching its arms, and looking around with hungry eyes. The Mediterranean is now a Roman lake, calm and glass-like, reflecting the blue sky. But beneath that glass, the currents are changing. The ships that used to carry troops and weapons are now preparing to carry something else. Something heavier, shinier, and more corrosive. The era of struggle is over. The era of excess is about to begin. And the Romans, standing in the bright sunlight of their absolute victory, are completely unprepared for the shadows that are about to lengthen across their own hearts. It is a seduction of the spirit. The danger does not come with a roar, but with a whisper, telling them that they are invincible, that they are eternal, that the rules of history no longer apply to them. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine the city of Rome as a warrior who has finally taken off his heavy armor piece by piece. The helmet is set aside, the breastplate is unbuckled, the greaves are untied. The feeling of the cool air on the skin is delicious, yes, but the skin is soft, and without the armor, the warrior is vulnerable in a way he has never been before. Not to the sword of an enemy, but to the slow, creeping infection of his own success. The silence of the city is deceptive. It is the silence of a calm sea before the tide turns. The discipline that carved an empire out of rock is beginning to erode, washed away not by waves of soldiers, but by the gentle, relentless lapping of uncontested time. In this new world, the greatest danger to Rome is no longer Carthage. It is Rome itself. The external walls are secure, stronger than ever. But the internal walls, the invisible barriers of custom, restraint, and mutual respect, are beginning to crumble silently into dust. The peace is beautiful, like a golden afternoon that stretches on forever. But it is a peace that has forgotten the value of struggle. And in that forgetting, it sows the seeds of its own unraveling. Rome sleeps soundly tonight, the nightmare of Carthage gone, unaware that the dream it is entering will prove far more difficult to wake from. As the fear evaporates, the vacuum it leaves behind is filled by something far heavier, far more tangible, and infinitely more seductive than the empty air of peace. If the silence of the previous years was the absence of noise, what follows now is the slow, rhythmic clatter of wagon wheels on stone, a sound that begins at the docks of the Tiber and does not stop for decades. The river, usually brown and sluggish, seems to swell not with rain, but with the displacement of 1,000 ships sitting low in the water. The year 146 BC is a double-edged sword in the history of the Mediterranean. While Scipio was burning Carthage in the west, another Roman general, Lucius Mummius, was sacking the ancient glittering city of Corinth in the east. Two of the greatest trade centers of the ancient world were cracked open like ripe pomegranates in the same season, and their juices, sweet, sticky, and intoxicating, flowed directly into the mouth of Rome. Imagine standing on the banks of the river as the sun begins to set, turning the water into a sheet of hammered copper. The barges are unloading. They do not carry grain or timber, the necessities of survival that Rome has known for centuries. They carry statues of marble that seem to breathe, bronze vessels from Corinth that ring like bells when touched, tapestries dyed in purple so deep it looks like congealed night, and silver, so much silver that the economy of the city will struggle to digest it. This is the golden poison. It does not kill the body, it softens the will. For generations, the Roman character was defined by auctoritas and gravitas, authority and seriousness. A Roman was a man of iron, content with a simple wool tunic, a bowl of porridge, and a sword that didn't chip. Luxury was suspicious. Luxury was something for the Greeks, for the Persians, for the defeated. But now, victory has brought the spoils of the defeated right into the atrium of the victor. And the Romans find that luxury feels wonderful against the skin. It is a slow, creeping transformation, like ivy growing over a stone wall, gradually hiding the rough, durable surface beneath a layer of lush, green softness. The poison tastes like honey. It starts with the table. The old Roman dinner, spare, functional, meant to fuel the body for work or war, is replaced by the banquet. Exotic spices from the edges of the known world, pepper and cinnamon, begin to drift through the Roman air, masking the simple scent of bread. Wine, once a modest accompaniment, becomes a culture of connoisseurship. And with the wine comes the conversation, shifting from crop yields and military tactics to art, philosophy, and theater. Historians still argue whether the influx of Greek culture during this period civilized the rough Roman spirit or rotted it from the inside out, a debate that the Romans themselves were having in real time. The conservative elders looked at the young men wearing softer fabrics and reciting Greek poetry with horror, seeing in these refinements the very weakness they had just conquered. But the young men looked back with pity, wondering why one should live like a Spartan when one could live like a king. The city begins to glitter. The dark volcanic tufa stone that built the Republic is slowly being covered or replaced by bright limestone and imported marble. But there is a cost to this brightness. The influx of wealth is not a tide that lifts all boats. It is a flash flood that carves deep, dividing canyons through the society. The gold from Carthage and Corinth does not go to the common soldier or the small farmer. It flows into the coffers of the generals, the senators, and the equestrian business class who manage the war contracts. A new hunger is born, not a hunger for food, which is easily satisfied, but a hunger for status. Suddenly, it is not enough to be a citizen of Rome. One must be a wealthy citizen of Rome. The competition that once played out on the battlefield now plays out in the marketplace. Who has the largest villa? Who has the most Greek statues in their garden? Who has the most slaves attending them in the forum? This wealth brings with it a strange narcotic effect. Problems that once required hard work and civic sacrifice now seem solvable with a handful of coins. Why repair the old aqueduct with community labor when you can pay a contractor to do it? Why settle a dispute with a neighbor through arbitration when you can buy the judge? The moral muscles of the Republic, once toned by the constant exertion of necessity, begin to atrophy from disuse. The golden poison works by convincing the victim that they are stronger than ever, even as their bones become brittle. As you visualize this era, picture a set of scales. On one side is the immense crushing weight of the plunder, the gold bars, the silver talents, the bronze art. On the other side is the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, the unwritten code of conduct that valued frugality, loyalty, and discipline. Watch as the gold side slams down, sending the ancestors flying up into the air, weightless and forgotten. The tragedy is that the Romans believed this is the reward they were promised. They believed this era of abundance is the natural result of their piety and their valor. They do not see that the wealth is an acid, slowly eating through the ties that bind them together. The shared struggle is gone, replaced by individual accumulation. In the soft, flickering light of this new, wealthy Rome, the shadows are getting sharper. The gap between the man who owns the ship and the man who unloads it is widening into a chasm that no amount of rhetoric can bridge. And deep in the countryside, far from the perfumed banquets of the capital, the true cost of this golden age is about to be paid, not in coin, but in the displacement of the very people who built the empire. The poison is in the system now, circulating through the veins of the Republic, sweet and deadly, promising an eternal summer of prosperity, while the winter of discontent quietly gathers its strength just beyond the city walls. The gold shines so brightly that it blinds them to the precipice they are walking toward, a precipice built of their own success. Rome is richer than it has ever been, but for the first time in its history, its soul is up for sale. Leaving the glittering banquets and the noise of the capital behind, the camera of history drifts northward, out through the city gates and onto the long, dusty ribbon of the Via Appia, heading deep into the Italian countryside. Here, the golden glow of victory fades into the stark, sun-bleached reality of the mid-afternoon. The silence of the fields is heavy, but it is not the peaceful silence of nature at rest. It is the hollow silence of abandonment. Imagine walking alongside a figure who is nothing like the perfumed aristocrats of the Forum. He is gaunt, his skin turned to leather by the African sun, his tunic stained with the red dust of foreign campaigns. He is a legionary, a backbone of the Republic, finally walking home after 6, 7, perhaps 10 years of war. In his mind, he carries a picture that has sustained him through cold nights and bloody skirmishes. A small plot of land, a few acres of wheat, an olive grove twisted with age, and a farmhouse where his wife and children wait. This dream of the farmer-soldier, the Cincinnatus ideal, is the bedrock of Roman identity. But as he crests the final hill, the dream dissolves into the grey reality of neglect. The roof of his farmhouse has slumped inward, like a chest collapsing after a final breath. The fields, once neat squares of golden green, are choked with briars and wild grass. The boundary stones, sacred markers of his ancestors' heritage, have been uprooted and cast aside. He is standing in a ghost story of his own making. This is the hidden cost of empire, the tragedy that unfolds quietly in the shadow of triumph. While the soldier was away securing the borders of the world for Rome, Rome was busy forgetting him. The economics of victory are cruel. The vast influx of wealth that poisoned the city in the previous section has now spilled into the countryside, but it has not come as rain to water the crops. It has come as a flood to wash away the smallholder. The wealthy elite, flush with silver from the sacked cities of Carthage and Corinth, needed somewhere to invest their new fortunes. Land is the only investment that truly matters to a Roman. So they bought it, acre by acre, valley by valley. And if a small farm stood in the way, well, the owner was away fighting, his wife was destitute, his debts were piling up. It was easy enough to seize the land, legally or otherwise, and absorb it into the growing maw of the giant estate. These massive plantations, known to history as latifundia, began to stretch across the Italian peninsula like a green ocean. swallowing the islands of independent farms. The returning soldier drops his back in the tall grass, the metal clanking softly against the earth. He walks to the edge of what used to be his property. But instead of seeing a neighbor, another free citizen, with whom he might share a cup of wine, he sees a gang of men working the soil in the distance. They are chained together. They do not speak Latin. They are the spoils of the very war he just won. This is the bitterest irony of the post-Carthage world. The Roman soldier conquered the foreign enemy, only to bring them home as enslaved laborers who would replace him on his own land. The captive Carthaginian, the Macedonian, the Spaniard, they are cheaper to feed than a free Roman family, and they cannot be drafted into the army. They are the perfect economic engines for the new aristocracy. The free peasant, the man who built the republic with his sweat and blood, has become obsolete. He has been priced out of existence by his own victory. The emotional weight of this displacement is crushing. To a Roman, land was not just an asset, it was identity. It was the physical link to the Lares and Penates, the household gods who watched over the family line. To lose the land is to lose one's place in the universe. Watch the soldier as he kneels by the ruined hearth of his home. He touches the cold ash. There is a profound sense of betrayal here, a silent breach of the ancient contract between the state and the citizen. The state asked for his life, and he gave it. In return, the state allowed his livelihood to be stolen. Historians still argue whether this agrarian crisis was a sudden catastrophe or a slow, decades-long erosion that accelerated after 146 BC. But for the man kneeling in the dirt, the speed of the change matters less than the finality of it. He is a stranger in his own country. The landscape he fought to protect has changed its shape, becoming hostile to him. The sensory details of this transformation are subtle but pervasive. The countryside smells different now. It smells of industrial efficiency, monoculture crops of olives and grapes destined for export, rather than the mixed subsistence farming of the past. The sounds have changed. The chatter of local village life, the festivals, the market days, these are fading, replaced by the sullen silence of forced labor and the harsh orders of the overseer. The latifundia are silent factories of agriculture, devoid of the civic spirit that once animated the rural districts. The small villages that dotted the hillsides begin to empty out, their shutters banging in the wind, their inhabitants drifting away like smoke. The soldier stands up. He has no choice. He cannot farm this ruin. He cannot compete with the slave-run estate next door. He cannot pay his debts. He picks up his pack. The weight of it is familiar, perhaps the only familiar thing left. He turns his back on the home of his ancestors, his shadow stretching long and thin before him in the late afternoon light. Where can he go? There is only one place left. The road that brought him here leads back to the source of the problem. He must go to the city. He must go to Rome. Not as a conqueror, not as a citizen farmer, but as a refugee in his own land. He joins a slow, tragic migration that is happening all over Italy. Thousands of men, women, and children, dispossessed and desperate, flowing like a muddy river toward the capital. They carry their few belongings, their hungry children, and a burning, confused anger. They are the headless multitude, the proletariat, men who have nothing left to give the state but their children, proles. As he walks away, the wind rustles through the neglected wheat, whispering the end of an era. The backbone of the Republic has been broken, not by Hannibal, but by greed. The empty fields of Italy are not just an economic statistic, they are a spiritual void. The connection between the Roman and the soil, a connection that defined the virtue of the early Republic, has been severed. The land that bred hardy, independent men is now breeding vast wealth for the few and misery for the many. The sun dips lower, turning the sky a bruised purple, matching the mood of the traveler. He walks toward the 7 hills, expecting salvation. But he is walking into a city that views him not as a hero, but as a problem to be managed. The empty fields behind him fall silent, waiting for the darkness, bearing witness to the fact that Rome has won the world but lost its own foundation. The greatest empire on earth is now floating on a sea of displaced souls, and the storm is gathering on the horizon, unseen but felt in the hollow ache of the abandoned earth. The road ends here, at the Porta Capena, the great southern gate of Rome, where the dust of the journey meets the hard, unforgiving basalt of the city streets. If the countryside was a landscape of silence and abandonment, the city is a landscape of overwhelming, suffocating compression. The displaced families we watched leaving their fields in the previous section now pour into the capital, not as a conquering army, but as a slow, steady tide of desperation that rises with every passing month. They drift through the heavy archways like dry leaves blown by a wind they cannot control, carrying their entire lives in bundles on their backs, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. To them, Rome was always a distant idea, a golden abstraction of power and law. Now, up close, it is a living, breathing beast that smells of wood smoke, unwashed wool, and garlic. The city is swelling. It is stretching its stone skin to accommodate this influx, but the seams are beginning to burst. You can feel the change in the air pressure of the streets. The rhythm of Rome is shifting from the purposeful march of a republic at work to the restless, shuffling drift of a population with nowhere to go. These new arrivals gravitate toward the low-lying valleys between the hills, particularly the Subura, the notorious district that festers behind the monumental center. Imagine walking with them into this canyon of shadows. The buildings here are not the marble temples of the Forum. They are insular, towering tenement blocks of timber and mud brick that rise 5, 6, sometimes 7 stories into the air, leaning precariously over the narrow alleys below, so that neighbors can almost shake hands across the street from their upper windows. Sunlight rarely touches the pavement here. It is a world of perpetual twilight, where the air is thick and stagnant, trapped between the high walls. The sensory experience of the Subura is intense and overwhelming. It is a cacophony of life compressed into too small a space. The crying of babies, the shouting of water sellers, the clatter of wooden clogs on stone, the endless, low-level hum of thousands of people breathing in the dark. But beneath the noise, there is a profound sense of loss. These men drifting through the alleys are not urbanites by nature. They are farmers. Their hands are shaped for the plow handle, not for begging. They are used to the open sky and the silence of the growing season. And here, trapped in these wooden hives, they are slowly going mad with idleness. This is a critical historical truth of the post-Carthage era, the creation of the plebs urbana, the urban mob. But do not think of them as a faceless rabble. Think of them as individual fathers, veterans of the legions, who have been stripped of their dignity. The most painful ritual of this new life is the morning salutatio. In the old days, a Roman citizen stood tall and independent. Now, without land to support him, he must attach himself to a wealthy patron. Every morning, before the sun has fully risen, thousands of these displaced men gather outside the villas of the rich, waiting in line to pay their respects to the master of the house. They wait in the cold, shifting from foot to foot, hoping for the sportula, a small basket of food or a few coins given in exchange for their political loyalty and their applause in the forum. It is a humiliation that eats away at the soul of the Republic. The relationship between the classes, once based on mutual obligation and respect, has twisted into something transactional and degrading. The patron buys the client's vote with bread. The client sells his freedom for survival. As you wander deeper into this city of drifting shadows, you notice the eyes of the men sitting on the steps of the fountains or leaning against the walls of the bathhouses. They are empty. They are bored. And in a society built on martial virtue, boredom is a dangerous explosive. The Roman state has not yet figured out how to manage this population. There is no welfare state yet, no organized system to employ them. They are simply there, a vast reservoir of frustrated energy accumulating in the dark corners of the capital. The contrast is staggering. Just a few streets away, the wealth we saw arriving in Section 3 is being spent on lavish public games and private banquets, while here in the shadows of the insula, families are rationing lentils. The psychological impact on the city is profound. Rome is becoming a place of extremes, losing the middle ground that once anchored it. The streets feel different at night now. There is an edge to the darkness. Crime, once rare in the disciplined early republic, begins to rise. The rich hire private bodyguards, walking through the city surrounded by torches and cudgels, while the poor navigate the gloom at their own peril. It is a physical manifestation of the social fracture. The city is sorting itself into the hunters and the hunted, the feeders and the fed. Yet, there is a strange, tragic beauty to the resilience of these people. Even in the squalor of the tenements, the Roman spirit flickers. You see it in the way a mother tends to a pot of basil on a windowsill, trying to bring a piece of the lost farm into the city. You hear it in the stories the old veterans tell in the taverns, recounting the battles of Zama or Pydna, their voices rising with pride even as their bellies grumble. They are holding on to an identity that the city is trying to erase. But the city is relentless. It grinds them down. The insulae are dangerous. They collapse frequently, burying families in rubble, or they catch fire, turning entire blocks into infernos that rage for days. Fire is a constant, terrified whisper in the subura. When you sleep in these buildings, you sleep with one ear open, listening for the crackle of flame or the scream of fire in the night. This low-level anxiety permeates the dreams of the populace. Rome, the mistress of the world, has become a trap for her own children. The drift continues, day after day, year after year. The population of the city balloons to perhaps 500,000, then more. A density the ancient world has never seen. It is a social experiment on a massive scale conducted without a plan. The shadows of the subura are not just physical. They are political. In this mass of disaffected, hungry voting citizens, ambitious politicians begin to see an opportunity. If the Senate will not help these people, perhaps a leader who speaks their language will. The mob is a weapon waiting for a hand to pick it up. But for now, in 140 BC and the years immediately following, there is only the drifting, the slow, aimless movement of men who have lost their anchor. They lean against the graffiti-covered walls, watching the litters of the senators pass by, and they wonder what happened to the Rome they fought for. They wonder why victory tastes so much like ash. The mood is one of heavy, suspended waiting, like the air before a thunderstorm when the barometric pressure drops and the birds stop singing. The city is full, yet it feels hollow, its moral core eaten away by the acid of inequality. As the moon rises over the 7 hills, casting the sprawling, chaotic rooftops of the tenements into silhouette, the city looks less like a monument to glory and more like a vast, dark ocean, heaving with the breath of the forgotten. The drifting shadows are gathering, pooling together, and soon they will find a voice that will shake the very foundations of the Republic. But tonight, they just sleep, fitfully, in the crowded dark, dreaming of open fields they will never see again. As the sun climbs higher over the changing city, the sounds of human misery in the Subura are gradually drowned out by a new rhythmic percussion that echoes from the slopes of the Palatine and the Campus Martius. The sharp, high-pitched clink, clink, clink of iron chisels striking stone. If the previous era of Rome was defined by the clash of steel on steel in distant battlefields, this new era is defined by the hammer and the trowel right here at home. The city is shedding its skin. For centuries, Rome was a brown and grey city, built from the volcanic bones of Italy itself. Tufa, peppermint, and travertine, porous, rough stones that absorbed the rain and seemed to grow naturally out of the earth. It was a city that looked like its people, sturdy, unpretentious, and ready to weather any storm. But now, walk through the dust of the construction sites and watch as the first blocks of white marble are hoisted into the air, dazzling and alien against the soft Italian sky. This is the physical manifestation of the mental shift we have been witnessing. The conquest of Greece did not just bring statues. It brought an appetite for the stone that housed the gods. The rough brick and timber of the Republic are being encased in a cold, smooth shell of imported luxury. The most striking example of this transformation stands rising in the Campus Martius, the Porticus Metelli. Built by the victor of the Macedonian Wars, it is the first structure in Rome to be constructed entirely of marble. Close your eyes and run your hand over the surface of these new walls. They are not warm and pitted like the old tufa. They are cool, glass-smooth, and impenetrable. They reflect the sun with a blinding intensity that forces you to look away. This is architecture as a statement of dominance, not just over the world, but over one's own fellow citizens. In the old days, public works were utilitarian: walls to protect, sewers to drain, roads to connect. The temple of Jupiter on the Capitol was grand, yes, but it belonged to the state. These new monuments, however, bear the names of individuals. They are vanity projects written in stone. The porticus is not just a walkway, it is a boundary. Inside its colonnades, enclosed by rows of gleaming pillars, the noise of the city is shut out. The air is perfumed. Art stolen from the great cities of the East is displayed for the leisure of the elite. It is a private paradise carved out of the public sphere. This is where the architectural face of the city begins to harden, mirroring the hardening of the Roman heart. The open city of the early Republic, where the patrician's house was often open to his clients and the street life flowed freely in and out, is being replaced by a city of walls, gates, and exclusions. The sensory shift is profound. The smell of the city changes from the earthy scent of timber and damp brick to the dry, chalky dust of pulverized limestone. The visual palette shifts from earth tones to blinding white and gold. But there is a coldness to this beauty. The marble does not breathe. It does not age with the grace of the old stone. It remains aloof, perfect, and untouched by the grime of daily life. It stands apart from the people, just as the men who built it are beginning to stand apart. And it is not just the materials that are changing. It is the very engineering of space. The Romans are beginning to master concrete, opus cementicium, allowing them to create vaults and arches that defy gravity, enclosing vast spaces that dwarf the human scale. These buildings are designed to make the individual feel small, to overwhelm the viewer with the sheer weight of power. A citizen walking past these new edifices feels a subtle psychological shift. He is no longer a participant in the greatness of Rome. He is a spectator to it. The city is becoming a stage set, a backdrop for the ambitions of the great families. Historians still argue whether this architectural revolution was a necessary modernization that allowed Rome to rival the great capitals of the East, or whether it was a visual corruption that prioritized aesthetic grandeur over civic function. But for the man walking in the shadow of the new porticos, the debate is academic. He only knows that the city feels less like his home and more like a palace he is merely allowed to visit. The intimacy of the 7 hills is being paved over. The sacred groves, where the ancient spirits of the land were thought to dwell, are being cut down to make way for ornamental gardens filled with foreign plants that require constant watering. Even nature is being conquered and forced into a geometry of control. As you drift through this marble labyrinth, notice how the sound carries differently. In the narrow wooden streets of the old city, sound was deadened, intimate. Here, against the hard stone, it echoes, sharp and brittle. A whisper can be heard across a courtyard, yet a shout seems to vanish into the sky. It is a sterile acoustic. This is the setting for the drama that is about to unfold. A drama of high stakes and cold calculations. The backdrop has been prepared. The rough wooden stage of the ancestors has been torn down, and a new stage of marble and gold has been erected. It is beautiful, undeniably. It gleams in the moonlight like a pearl, but pearls are cold to the touch. And as the city wraps itself in this white finery, it is unknowingly building the mausoleum of its own republic. The brick of Rome, the humble, resilient, interconnected community, is being hidden behind a facade of imperial splendor. The strength of the brick was that it held together. The weakness of the marble is that it stands alone. The sun sets on this harder, brighter city, casting long, sharp shadows that cut across the streets like blades, signaling that the time for soft compromises and organic growth has passed. The era of the monument has begun, and in a city of monuments, there is very little room for men. Into this marble arena, where the air is thick with the dust of construction and the unseen pressure of the displaced, steps a figure who seems, at first glance, to be part of the problem rather than the solution. He is young, handsome, and born into the very heart of the Roman aristocracy. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. He is the grandson of Scipio Africanus, the great hero who defeated Hannibal. By blood and breeding, he belongs to the golden circle of the elite, the men who dine on silver platters and walk the cool colonnades of the Porticus Metelli. But Tiberius carries a shadow in his eyes, a memory that will not let him sleep. It is said that while traveling through Etruria on his way to a military post, he looked out at the rolling Italian countryside, the landscape that should have been dotted with the smoking chimneys of free Roman farmers, and saw only silence. He saw the vast estates we witnessed earlier, stretching to the horizon, worked not by citizens who could serve in the legions, but by foreign slaves who owed Rome nothing but hatred. In that quiet moment on the dusty road, the young aristocrat realized the terrifying truth that the victory parades in Rome were trying to hide. The Republic was dying from the roots up. It is a historical truth that Tiberius was not a revolutionary by nature. He was a reformer who believed he was saving the conservative order, yet his actions would ignite the very fire he sought to extinguish. Imagine him now, standing on the rostra, the speaker's platform in the forum, the crowd surging before him like a restless sea. The year is 133 BC, and the heat is rising. He speaks, and his voice is not the thunder of a demagogue, but the piercing clarity of a man telling a truth no one wants to hear. He famously tells the crowd that the wild beasts that roam over Italy have their dens and holes to lurk in, but the men who fight and die for Italy enjoy the common air and light and nothing else. His words drift over the heads of the senators standing in the shadows of the temples, and for the first time, the ruling class feels a chill that has nothing to do with the wind. Tiberius is proposing the Lex Sempronia Agraria, a law to enforce old limits on how much public land one man can own and to redistribute the excess to the poor. It is a healing measure, a bandage for the bleeding wound of the displacement we saw in the Subura. But to the wealthy landowners, it is an act of war. They do not see a bandage, they see a knife aimed at their fortunes. This is where the great divide begins, not just a disagreement over policy, but a fracturing of reality itself. One side sees justice, the other sees theft. The Senate, accustomed to ruling by consensus and unspoken influence, finds itself paralyzed by this young man who refuses to play by the rules of polite corruption. They turn to their traditional weapon, the veto. They bribe another tribune, Marcus Octavius, to stand up and block Tiberius's proposal. In the old Rome, this would have been the end of it. Tiberius would have bowed his head, accepted the stalemate, and the status quo would have survived. But Tiberius is driven by that memory of the empty fields. He does the unthinkable. He calls for a vote to remove Octavius from office, arguing that a tribune who acts against the people is no true tribune. A gasp goes through the forum. The seagulls wheeling overhead cry out into the sudden hush. This is the sound of the Republic's unwritten constitution daring. Tiberius is breaking the seal on a vessel of populist power that can never be closed again. Historians still argue whether Tiberius Gracchus was a genuine altruist driven by pity for the poor, or an ambitious opportunist seeking to build a power base that would eclipse the Senate. But as you watch the faces in the crowd, the motive matters less than the emotion. Look at the faces of the veterans in the front row, men with scars and grey beards, men who have been invisible for a decade. They are weeping, Someone finally sees them. Someone is speaking for them. A hope, fragile and dangerous, begins to bloom in the stifling air of the city. But look also at the faces of the senators, the men in the red-bordered togas. Their expressions are hardening into masks of stone. They are not listening to the arguments. They are counting the threats. They see in Tiberius not a reformer, but a king in the making, a tyrant who is bypassing their authority to appeal directly to the mob. The tragedy of this moment is that both sides believe they are saving Rome. Tiberius believes he is saving the people to save the army. The Senate believes they are saving the Constitution to save the state. The middle ground, that safe harbor where the Republic has anchored for centuries, is disappearing beneath the waves of rhetoric. The air in the forum becomes electric, charged with the static of imminent collision. It is the feeling of a family argument that has suddenly gone too far, where words are said that can never be taken back. The divide is no longer just about land. It is about trust. The trust that the Senate cares for the people is gone. The trust that the people will respect the Senate is gone. All that remains is the raw contest of wills. As evening falls over the city, the meetings break up, but the tension remains, hanging in the narrow alleys like smoke. In the houses of the rich, whispers of assassination begin to circulate, justified by the language of patriotism. In the tenements of the poor, there is a feverish excitement, a belief that the dawn will finally bring their share of the empire's gold. But Tiberius, walking home surrounded by his supporters, perhaps feels the weight of what he has done. He has awakened the giant. He has tried to heal the fractured land, but in doing so, he has exposed the fracture in the Roman soul. The city settles into an uneasy sleep, the marble monuments gleaming pale and ghostly in the moonlight, witnessing the last quiet night before the storm breaks. The arguments have been made, the laws have been read, the time for speaking is almost over. And in the silence that follows the speeches, the sharp metallic sound of a sword being sharpened can be heard in the distance. A sound that signals that the golden age of agreement is over, and the iron age of conflict has begun. The sun that rises over the Capitoline Hill on this fateful morning in 133 BC struggles to pierce a heavy, suffocating mist that clings to the peaks of Rome. It is as if the gods themselves are drawing a veil over the city, unwilling to witness what is about to happen. The air is thick, humid, and charged with a static electricity that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Today is the day of the voting assembly, the day Tiberius Gracchus seeks re-election as tribune, an act that is technically legal but breaks every unwritten rule of tradition. The forum is a churning ocean of bodies surging up the slope towards the temple of Jupiter best and greatest. But notice the change in the crowd. In the past, Roman assemblies were solemn, orderly affairs, guided by the rhythm of ritual. Today, there is no rhythm. There is only a chaotic, shouting dissonance. The crowd is not a body of citizens. It is a pressurized vessel waiting to burst. Tiberius stands near the temple, surrounded by his loyalists, but his eyes are darting, nervous. He touches his head, a gesture meant to signal to his supporters that his life is in danger. But across the square, his enemies interpret it differently. They shout that he is asking for a crown. Inside the nearby Temple of Fides, the Temple of Faith, a cruel irony for what is transpiring, the Senate is meeting in emergency session. The mood here is not one of debate, but of hysteria. The golden poison, we watched enter the city has done its work. The men here are terrified of losing their grip on the state. Scipio Nasica, the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, rises. He is a cousin to Tiberius, but in this moment, blood means nothing. He demands the consul act. When the consul refuses to use violence against a citizen, Nasica makes a decision that will echo for 1,000 years. He stands up, and with a dramatic, sweeping motion, he pulls the fold of his toga over his head. It is a ritual gesture, usually performed before sacrificing an animal to the gods. The symbolism is terrifyingly clear. He is marking Tiberius not as a political opponent, but as a sacrifice necessary for the purification of the state. "Let those who wish to save the Republic follow me," he roars. And they do. A mob of senators and their clients spills out of the temple, surging into the sunlight. This is the moment the glass shatters. For nearly 4 centuries, political disputes in Rome, no matter how heated, were settled with words, votes, or at worst, exile. The streets of Rome had remained free of political blood. But as Nasica's group charges into the crowd, that history evaporates. There are no weapons, no swords, no spears, because weapons are forbidden in the sacred precinct of the capital. And so, the violence that erupts is raw, primitive, and improvised. The senators grab the legs of the wooden benches where the citizens sit. They tear the sturdy oak apart with their bare hands. They pick up stones from the road. The sound that fills the air is not the clash of metal, but the sickening, dull thud of wood against bone. It is the sound of the Republic tearing itself apart with the very furniture of its own institutions. The crowd, stunned by the sight of their fathers, the patres, attacking them, panics. People are trampled. The screams echo off the marble walls of the temples, a chaotic liturgy of terror that replaces the orderly prayers of the morning. Tiberius tries to flee. The toga, that symbol of Roman dignity, becomes a tangled trap. He stumbles. As he falls, the first blow lands. It does not come from a foreign enemy, nor from a gladiator, but from a fellow magistrate, a colleague. Then another blow, and another. The violence is frenzied, intimate, and quick. Within minutes, the man who tried to save the farmers of Italy lies dead on the pavement, his skull crushed by a bench leg, a piece of the Senate's own seating used to silence the voice of the people. Alongside him lie 300 of his supporters, their bodies strewn across the sacred hill like broken dolls. The silence that follows is instantaneous and absolute. The shouting stops. The dust begins to settle. The senators, breathing hard, their togas stained not with wine, but with the blood of citizens, look at one another. In their eyes, the madness of the moment begins to fade, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. They have won the day, yes, but they have crossed a river far wider and more treacherous than the Rubicon. That night, the final indignity occurs. By Roman law, a citizen, even a criminal, is entitled to a burial. The family should be allowed to mourn. But the hatred that has poisoned the city denies even this. The bodies of Tiberius and his followers are dragged through the streets by hooks, treated like common garbage. They are hauled to the banks of the Tiber and thrown into the dark, swirling waters. Stand on the bridge and watch as the ripples distort the reflection of the moon. The river takes them, washing them out towards the sea. But it cannot wash away the stain on the city's soul. This is the first time in the history of the Republic that a political dispute has ended in mass murder. The unspoken rule that violence is for enemies and law is for citizens has been shattered. Once that door is kicked open, it can never be fully closed. Every ambitious man in Rome now knows the secret. If you cannot win with an argument, you can win with a club. If the law stands in your way, you can kill the law. The psychological shock to the populace is traumatic. The Roman people wake up the next morning in a city that looks the same but feels fundamentally different. The trust is gone. The concordia, the harmony between the classes, is revealed to be a lie. The poor look at the Senate not with reverence, but with a sullen, simmering hatred. The Senate looks at the people with paranoia, seeing a potential assassin in every face. Historians still argue whether this specific day was the true end of the Republic, or if the system lingered on for another century. But for the Roman standing by the river, watching the water rush by, the answer is clear. The spirit of the Republic died with Tiberius. What remains is a corpse that will twitch and thrash for a long time, driven by momentum and memory. But the heart has stopped beating. The cycle of vengeance has begun. The blood spilled on the Capitol cries out for more blood, and the ghosts of the unburied dead will haunt the city, whispering that violence is now the only currency that matters. The night deepens, and the city locks its doors, afraid of itself. The comforting illusion of unity is gone, replaced by the cold, hard knowledge that in this new Rome, power is not given. It is taken, and the hand that takes it is the hand that is willing to strike the hardest. The blood that stained the stones of the Capitol has dried, but the wound it left in the body politic refuses to heal. Instead, the infection travels outward, away from the fevered city and toward the cold, hard frontiers where the legions are camped. If the previous section showed us the collapse of political loyalty, this section reveals the collapse of military loyalty, the precise moment when the sword of Rome ceased to belong to the Senate and began to belong to the man who held the hilt. The year is 107 BC, and the Republic is gasping for air. To the north, vast Germanic tribes, the Cimbri and Teutones, are spilling over the Alps like an avalanche of ice and iron, annihilating every Roman army sent to stop them. To the south, in the burning sands of Numidia, a war against the cunning King Jugurtha drags on in a humiliating stalemate. The old system, where only property-owning citizens could fight, has finally hit a mathematical wall. There are simply no more land-owning men left to draft. The displacement we witnessed in the countryside has hollowed out the recruitment pool. Rome needs soldiers, but it has only beggars. Into this desperate gap steps a man who looks nothing like the polished aristocrats of the Scipio clan. Caius Marius is a new man, a novus homo from the countryside, rough-voiced, scarred, and practically vibrating with an ambition that scares the old families. He stands in the forum, not to debate, but to recruit. And he does something that shatters centuries of tradition. He looks past the property lines. He looks into the shadows of the Subura, into the eyes of the head count, the capite censi, the men who own nothing but their own lives, and he says, "I will take you." Imagine the shock of this moment. For the first time, the army is not a duty for the established. It is a job for the destitute. Watch the line of men forming to sign their names. They are the sons of the displaced farmers we saw walking away from their fields in Section 4. They are the drifting shadows of Section 5. They are hungry, and Marius offers them bread. They are naked, and Marius offers them armor. They are forgotten, and Marius offers them glory. The transformation of the legion is physical and immediate. In the old days, a soldier brought his own gear. His shield was his grandfather's, his sword a family heirloom. Now, the state, through the general, provides everything. Walk through the camp of Marius's mules and listen to the new sounds of the army. It is the sound of standardization. Every man carries the same heavy pack, the same pilum, the same short sword. They are no longer a gathering of citizens. They are a machine of interchangeable parts. But the psychological shift is far more profound. When these men sit around the campfire at night, scraping the mud off their boots, they do not talk about the Senate and people of Rome. That is an abstraction that let them starve in the alleys. They talk about Marius. Marius gave them the silver in their pouch. Marius promised them land when the war is over. Marius is the one who walks the trench lines in the rain, sharing their hardtack and their danger. The general has become the pater, the father. This emotional transfer of loyalty is the turning point of the Republic's military soul. The vertical tie between the soldier and the state is severed. The horizontal tie between the soldier and his commander becomes the only bond that matters. It is a slow, quiet revolution, happening not in the Senate House, but in the mud of the encampment. The legionary looks at the Eagle Standard, and he sees his meal ticket, his retirement plan, and his identity. If the Senate refuses to grant the land Marius promised, the soldier will not blame Marius. He will blame the Senate. And if Marius asks him to march against the Senate to get that land, the question hangs in the smoke of the fire, unspoken but terrifyingly present. The army has become a private client base, armed with heavy infantry weapons. Historians still argue whether Marius saved Rome by creating a professional army capable of defeating the Germanic hordes, or whether he doomed it by forging the weapon that would eventually slit the Republic's throat. But standing in the cold wind of the northern frontier, watching the legions drill, the answer feels like both. The discipline is terrifyingly perfect. Marius drills these men until they are harder than the iron they carry. They crush the Teutones. They annihilate the Cimbri. They save Italy from invasion. The people of Rome hail Marius as the third founder of Rome, pouring libations to him in their homes alongside the gods. But the price of this salvation is hidden in the structure of the victory. The legions that march back to Rome are not returning to disband and go back to their farms, because they have no farms to go back to. They are wolves who have tasted blood, and they are looking to their alpha to feed them. The atmosphere of the camp is thick with a rough, mercenary camaraderie. These men are professionals now. War is their trade, and peace is their unemployment. They view the civilian politicians in Rome with the contempt of the wolf for the sheep. They know that the power has shifted, even if the men in togas haven't realized it yet. The civilian control of the military is becoming a fiction. The general is no longer just a magistrate serving a one-year term. He is a warlord with a standing army that relies on him for survival. This dependency creates a dangerous feedback loop. The general needs wars to pay his soldiers, and the soldiers need the general to start wars. The expansion of the empire is no longer driven by strategic necessity, but by the economic needs of the military machine itself. As the sun sets over the camp casting the long rows of tents into shadow, a chill settles that has nothing to do with the weather. You are watching the incubation of the civil wars. The tools that Julius Caesar will one day use to cross the Rubicon are being forged right here. In the reforms of Marius, the army has found a new father. And like any protective father, he will do anything to ensure his children are fed, even if it means burning down the house they live in. The soldiers wrap themselves in their cloaks, sleeping soundly, trusting in their commander. But back in Rome, the wise are beginning to lose sleep. They realize that the legions are no longer the walls of the Republic. They are a tiger that the Republic is holding by the tail. And the tiger is getting hungry. The distance between the camp and the city feels shorter than ever. And the road that leads from the frontier to the forum is paved with the dangerous, unconditional love of 40,000 armed men. If the military camp was a place of cold iron and muddy boots, the scene shifts now to a space of cool shadows, polished cedar, and the rustle of expensive silk. The basilica. Here, in the heart of the Roman Forum, the air is still and heavy, smelling of beeswax and old parchment. It is the place where the law is supposed to breathe. But as you walk through the high, vaulted hall, stepping softly on the mosaic floor, you realize that the air here is not clean. It is thick with something else. The metallic, cloying scent of gold. The year is drifting towards the middle of the 1st century BC, and the golden poison that entered the city decades ago has finally reached the heart of the judicial system. We are witnessing the Quaestio de Repetundis, the extortion court, in session. But this is not a trial. It is a transaction. The man standing in the dock is a former provincial governor, recently returned from governing Asia or Sicily. He should look worried. He has stripped his province bare, looting temples, seizing private estates, and executing those who dared to complain. But look at his face. He is bored. He is cleaning his fingernails. He knows a secret that the weeping provincials in the back of the room do not. Justice in Rome has become a luxury good, and he has the money to buy the entire stock. The mechanism of this corruption is elegant and terrifyingly open. The governor spent his first year in the province stealing enough to pay off his debts. He spent his second year stealing enough to bribe the jury he is facing right now. And he spent his third year stealing enough to live like a king for the rest of his life. It is a perfect, closed loop of graft. The jury sitting on their benches are not impartial peers. They are investors. Historians still argue whether the endless struggle between the Senate and the equestrian class for control of these jury courts was a genuine battle for judicial integrity, or merely a fight over who got to pocket the bribes. But for the man watching from the shadows, the distinction is meaningless. The result is the same. The verdict is decided before the opening arguments are even made. Watch the subtle signals. The nod from a juror to the defense counsel, the heavy purse exchanged in the alleyway behind the basilica the night before. The law, once the sacred bedrock of the Republic, has been turned into a marketplace where innocence and guilt are just commodities with fluctuating prices. The tragedy of this scene is found in the faces of the accusers. A delegation of Greeks or Sicilians stands in the corner, huddled together like sheep in a storm. They have traveled hundreds of miles, crossing dangerous seas, carrying the hopes of their ruined cities. They believe in the Rome of the myths, the Rome of stern justice and incorruptible honor. They have brought their ledgers, their witnesses, their scars. They speak in halting Latin, pouring out their grievances, trusting that the Senate will protect them. But their words simply dissolve in the vast, indifferent space of the court. The defense lawyer, perhaps the great orator Hortensius, or a rival of Cicero, stands up. He does not talk about the evidence. He talks about the governor's noble ancestors. He makes a joke about the strange accent of the accusers. The jury laughs. The sound of that laughter is arguably the most chilling sound in the entire history of the Republic. It is the sound of a ruling class that has lost its conscience, a class that views the rest of the world not as a responsibility, but as a harvest to be reaped. The sensory details of the corruption are overwhelming. It is not a dirty, grimy corruption. It is a clean, perfumed rot. The magistrate presiding over the court wears a toga of blinding white, the toga candida, but his hands are invisible, tucked away, counting the promise of future favors. You can hear the scratch of the stylus on the wax tablet, recording the official lie that will be filed in the archives. Acquitted. The word rings out, hollow and false. The governor stands up, smiling, and embraces his friends. The provincials stand frozen, unable to comprehend that the theft of their livelihood has just been legalized by the highest court in the world. They realize too late that they were never the plaintiffs. They were the punchline. They turn to leave, their sandals scuffing quietly on the stone, carrying the heavy knowledge that there is no appeal, no higher power to call upon. Rome has become a predator that writes its own laws of the jungle. This erosion of justice does more damage to the Republic than any barbarian invasion ever could. It destroys the invisible glue of the state, legitimacy. A state can survive a lost battle. It cannot survive the loss of belief. When the common citizen sees that the rich can buy their way out of murder, while the poor are crucified for stealing bread, the social contract snaps. The cynicism spreads from the basilica out into the streets like a contagion. Why obey the law if the law is a fraud? Why pay taxes if the money ends up in a governor's private vault? The moral authority of the Senate evaporates. In the taverns of the Subura, the people stop looking to the courts for justice and start looking for a strong man who will cut through the legal knots with a sword. The corruption of the courts prepares the psychological ground for dictatorship. If the law is broken, people will eventually crave a tyrant who can at least impose order. As the session ends and the crowd spills out into the late afternoon sun, the forum looks magnificent. The temples gleam, the statues of the ancestors look down with stony eyes. But the spirit that inhabits this stone shell has withered. The Roman virtue of fides, faithfulness, trustworthiness, has been sold to the highest bidder. The governor walks towards his litter, surrounded by sycophants, his toga rustling softly. He is free, he is rich, he is powerful. But he is also a symptom of a terminal disease. The sun dips lower, casting the basilica into shadow, and the figure of justice, usually depicted with a blindfold to ensure impartiality, seems to be wearing the blindfold for a different reason now, to avoid seeing the shame of what is done in her name. The coins have changed hands, the deal is done, and the Republic takes one more step towards the abyss, guided not by the light of law, but by the glitter of stolen gold. The silence returns to the empty hall, a silence that asks a question no one dares to answer. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who will watch the watchers? The sun has fully set now, and the noise of the forum fades into the distance, leaving us standing in the quiet, flickering shadows of a private Roman home, a domus on the Palatine Hill. If the previous sections showed us the rotting of the state's outer limbs, the army, the courts, the economy, this section takes us into the very heart of the organism, to the hearth fire where the Roman soul was once forged. We are here to witness the invisible, silent evaporation of the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. This was never a written law. It was something far more powerful, a collective hallucination of virtue, a heavy atmosphere of expectation that sat on the shoulders of every Roman from the moment they were born. It was the voice in their head that said, "We do not do that." It was the force that made a man choose death over dishonor, or poverty over corruption. But tonight, as you watch the master of the house recline on a couch upholstered in Babylonian tapestry, you realize that the voice has gone quiet. The atmosphere in the room is light, airy, and unburdened by the heavy gravity of the past. The stern wax masks of the ancestors, the imagines, hang on the walls of the atrium in their wooden cupboards, their painted eyes staring down at the dinner party below. In the old days, these masks were terrifying reminders of duty. A Roman walked past them and felt the weight of 10 generations watching him, demanding that he live up to their standards. Now, they are merely decoration, antique curiosities to be pointed out to guests between courses of dormice dipped in honey and poppy seeds, the link between the living and the dead. The electrical current of pietas, duty, that powered the Republic has been cut. The sensory shift in the room is palpable. The air smells of expensive balsam oil and saffron, masking the smell of the old simple wood smoke. The conversation is fluid, witty, and cynical. In the corner, an old man, perhaps a grandfather, who remembers the days before the wars, sits silently, clutching a cup of unmixed wine. He looks at his grandsons and does not recognize them. They are clean-shaven. Their skin is soft from the baths. Their tunics are loose and made of shimmering silk that clings to the body, a fashion that would have been considered effeminate and scandalous just 50 years ago. They speak Greek as easily as Latin, quoting Epicurus, a philosopher who teaches that the goal of life is pleasure and the avoidance of pain. To the old man, this is blasphemy. The Roman way is pain. The Roman way is endurance. The Roman way is to suffer for the state until you break. But the young men laugh. They see the state not as a sacred trust, but as a cow to be milked. They look at the old man's scars not with reverence, but with a mix of pity and embarrassment, as if he is a relic from a barbaric age that they have happily outgrown. This is the erosion of gravitas, that distinctly Roman quality of heavy, serious dignity. Rome is becoming weightless. Historians still argue whether this moral collapse was the root cause of the Republic's fall or merely a symptom of its rapid expansion, debating if a city-state's simple virtues could ever have survived the complexities of ruling a world empire. But for the family in this room, the cause is irrelevant. The effect is devastation. The unwritten rules that govern social interaction are dissolving. In the past, a handshake was a binding contract. Fides, faith, was the currency of social life. Now, as we saw in the courts, everything requires a seal, a witness, a bribe. The social fabric is fraying because the self-restraint that held it together is gone. The concept of pudor, shame, is vanishing. It was shame that kept a magistrate from stealing. It was shame that kept a general from marching on Rome. When you remove shame and replace it with the celebration of individual triumph and excess, you remove the safety brakes from the machine. The guests at the dinner party toast to their own success, oblivious to the fact that they are drinking from a cup that is slowly poisoning them. They believe they are the apex of civilization, more refined and sophisticated than the rough men who built the walls they live behind. They do not understand that their sophistication is a form of decay. The spiritual dimension of this loss is perhaps the most profound. The old Roman religion was a transactional, contractual affair with the gods. Dua des, I give so that you may give. It was practical, communal, and deeply serious. But look at the corner of the room, where the shrine to the lares, the household gods, sits. The offering bowl is dusty. The prayers are rushed, mumbled by a slave rather than the head of the household. The elite have stopped believing in the gods of the state. They might perform the rituals for the sake of public appearance, but in private, they are skeptics. When the fear of the gods evaporates, the sanctity of the oath evaporates with it. And a republic is, at its core, a network of oaths. If a man cannot be trusted to keep his word to Jupiter, he certainly cannot be trusted to keep his word to the Senate. The vertical anchor to the divine has been pulled up, leaving the ship of state to drift on the tides of human ambition. As the wine flows and the laughter gets louder, the shadows of the ancestors on the wall seem to recede, retreating into the darkness of the atrium, turning their backs on the scene. The mos maiorum is dying, not with a scream, but with a giggle. It is being laughed out of existence. The rigid, iron-spined character that defeated Hannibal has been melted down and recast into something gold, malleable, and ultimately weak. The tragedy is that these people feel liberated. They have cast off the chains of tradition. They are free to be individuals, free to pursue their own happiness, free to ignore the collective good. But they do not see that these chains were actually the support beams of the house. Without them, the roof is sagging. The way of the ancestors was the immune system of the Republic, attacking the viruses of greed and tyranny before they could take hold. Now the immune system is gone. The body is open to infection. The night wears on, and the old man finally stands up to leave, unable to bear the noise any longer. He walks out into the cool night air of the peristyle garden. He looks up at the stars, the same stars Scipio watched over Carthage. He feels a terrible loneliness. He realizes that he is the last of his kind. The Rome he knew, the Rome of austerity, of shared sacrifice, of silent strength, is already dead. It exists only in his memory. What surrounds him now is a different city, bearing the same name but possessing a different soul. A soul that is hungry, restless, and unmoored. He wraps his heavy wool cloak tight around him, not against the cold of the night, but against the chill of the future. He knows that a society that forgets its ancestors is destined to be forgotten by its descendants. The wind rustles through the leaves of the acanthus plants, whispering a eulogy for the Roman character. The candle in the atrium flickers and goes out, leaving the house in darkness, save for the moonlight that gleams off the cold, silent marble, illuminating a world that has lost its way, drifting comfortably, elegantly, towards the waterfall. And so we come to the end of the long day, standing on the edge of the final precipice, looking out over a city that has completely transformed from the brick town we first saw in the morning light. The sun is finally dipping below the Janiculum hill, painting the sky in deep, bruising shades of violet and charcoal, signaling the onset of the long twilight from which the Republic will never truly wake. The years have blurred into decades, and the decades have stacked up like old parchment, heavy and brittle. The prophecy of Scipio, whispered in the smoke of Carthage, has come to pass with a terrifying precision. The removal of the external enemy did not bring eternal peace. It brought an internal war that consumed the state from the inside out. We have watched the slow erosion of every pillar that held the roof of the Republic aloft: the farmer, the soldier, the judge, the senator, and the priest, until finally the roof could no longer hold its own weight. It collapsed, not with a sudden crash, but with a long, agonizing sigh that echoed across the Mediterranean for 100 years. The chaos of the street fighting we witnessed with the Gracchi grew into the organized slaughter of the civil wars. The private armies we saw formed by Marius clashed in battles that were far larger and bloodier than anything Hannibal ever inflicted. Roman fought Roman at Pharsalus, at Thapsus, at Philippi, covering the earth with the bodies of the very citizens who were supposed to rule it. The soil of the empire drank the blood of its children, and in doing so, it grew a new kind of crop, the monarchy. Out of this exhaustion steps a figure who understands the new reality perfectly: Octavian, who will become Augustus. He does not stand on the rostra and shout for revolution. He is quiet, cold, and infinitely patient. He looks at the weary Roman people, the descendants of those drifting shadows in the Subura, the sons of the displaced farmers, and he sees that they are tired. They are tired of freedom, if freedom means constant civil war. They are tired of the Senate's bickering. They are tired of the fear. They want what Scipio saw, vanishing in the smoke. They want stability. And Augustus offers them a deal. He will give them bread, he will give them circuses, and he will give them peace. In exchange, they must give him the Republic. He does not take the title of king. That word is still cursed. He calls himself Princeps, the first citizen. He claims to have restored the Republic, wrapping the corpse in beautiful silk robes and pretending it is still breathing. He keeps the Senate, he keeps the elections, he keeps the titles. But it is a masquerade. The power has moved from the forum to the palace. The Republic, that messy, beautiful, chaotic experiment in shared governance, is dead. It has been replaced by the empire, a machine of order, efficiency, and absolute control. Historians still argue whether the Roman Republic committed suicide or was murdered, debating if the system was fundamentally flawed and destined to fail, or if it was hijacked by ambitious men who exploited unparalleled circumstances. But as you walk through the streets of Augustan Rome, the debate feels distant. The city is quiet now. The riots have stopped. The fire brigades are working. The grain fleets arrive on time. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, has descended like a heavy velvet curtain. It is safe to walk at night again. But the air feels different. It is thinner. The electric tension of political liberty, the dangerous thrill of knowing that your vote could change the world, is gone. The citizens have become subjects. They walk past the great marble monuments, now dedicated not to the gods or the people, but to the emperor and his family, and they keep their heads down. They have traded their voice for their safety. It is the ultimate transaction in a city that learned to sell everything. Think back to that first moment on the hill overlooking Carthage. Scipio wept because he knew that the struggle was the glue. He knew that without the fear of a rival, Rome would become bloated, arrogant, and self-destructive. He was right. Rome conquered the world, but in the process, it lost itself. The austere, disciplined, collective society that defeated Carthage dissolved into a collection of individuals pursuing their own pleasure and power. The gold of the vanquished rotted the soul of the victor. The irony is absolute. Carthage, in its death, defeated Rome more thoroughly than Hannibal ever could in life. It killed the idea of Rome. What remains is a golden shell, magnificent and powerful, destined to rule the world for another 500 years. But the fire inside, the fire of the res publica, the public thing, has gone out. The twilight deepens into night. The stars come out, indifferent and cold, shining down on the Palatine Hill where the emperor sleeps, guarded by the Praetorian Guard, the ultimate symbol of force replacing law. The forum is empty, save for the ghosts of the past, the Gracchi, Marius, Cicero, Cato, wandering among the columns, whispering of what might have been. The camera of history pulls back, rising higher and higher, until the city is just a glowing embers in the dark Italian landscape. The roads radiate out from it, like the spokes of a wheel, carrying the legions to the ends of the earth, enforcing the peace of the dead republic. The noise of the arguments, the clash of the swords, the weeping of the displaced, it all fades into the silence of history. Rome was never the same after Carthage fell. It gained the world, but it lost its soul. And as the darkness finally claims the city, wrapping it in a slumber that will last for centuries, we realize that the story of Rome is not just a story of ancient men in togas. It is a mirror. It is a warning whispered in the dark about what happens when a society wins too much, when it loses the fear that keeps it honest, and when it forgets that the hardest enemy to defeat is always, ultimately, itself. The long day of the Republic is over. The empire has begun, and under the watchful gaze of the moon, the eternal city sleeps, dreaming of a past it can no longer remember, and a future it can no longer control. Now, let the weight of the centuries slide off your shoulders. The legions have stopped marching. The senators have stopped arguing. The fires of Carthage and the torches of Rome have all burned down to soft, cooling ash. You do not need to carry the burden of history anymore. It is all in the past, fixed and unchangeable, resting in the quiet dark behind you. Feel the present moment wrapping around you like a warm, soft blanket. The only empire that matters now is the empire of sleep, and its borders are safe. The silence in your room is not the dangerous silence of a vacuum, but the peaceful, restorative silence of rest. Let your breathing slow down, matching the gentle rhythm of a calm sea lapping against a shore, in and out, steady and slow. The figures we spoke of, Scipio, Tiberius, the farmer, the soldier, are all at rest now, and so are you. Let the marble and the gold fade into grey, and let the grey fade into the comforting black of deep sleep. You are safe. You are warm. The story is over. Sweet dreams.